The rain in Portland doesn't just fall, it settles into your bones, much like the secret I had been carrying for 3 weeks. My name is Elias Thorne, and for 7 years I thought I was building a kingdom with Sarah. We had the Craftsman home in Laurelhurst with the wraparound porch, the shared dreams of a family, and finally the miracle, a positive pregnancy test. But miracles aren't supposed to come with a delivery date that doesn't match the calendar. When I sat in that sterile clinic holding a lab report that confirmed my infertility from a childhood bout of mumps, a fact I had never known until a routine checkup, my entire world didn't just crack, it vanished. Looking at Sarah's glowing face as she rubbed her bump that evening, I realized I was living with a stranger. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a ghost in my own home, watching a woman I love carry another man's legacy while she smiled at me over dinner. I didn't confront her immediately. Anger is a flash, but betrayal is a slow burn. I spent the next few days watching her movements with a clinical detachment that terrified me. I observed the way she checked her phone under the table, the way her eyes lit up when a notification popped from a work contact she'd never mentioned before. Every time we sat down for coffee, I felt like I was watching a play where everyone but me knew the script. Where she told me it was pregnancy brain when she forgot to tell me she was staying late at the gallery. I played the part of the doting, oblivious husband to perfection, bringing her herbal tea and rubbing her feet, all while my mind was mapping out a total disappearance. If my life was a lie, I didn't want to be a part of the punchline anymore. I began to realize that every "I love you" she whispered was actually a request for me to keep funding the lie. I started moving quietly, like a shadow in the corner of our life. I wasn't going to just walk out, I was going to erase myself. I began withdrawing small amounts of cash, 300 here, 400 there, amounts barely noticeable against our monthly mortgage and shared expenses. I looked into our finances and realized Sarah had been more creative than I thought, and there were transfers to an account I didn't recognize, names that didn't belong in our social circle. It turns out Betrayal usually has a budget. I found a receipt for a jewelry boutique in Seattle, hidden in the lining of an old purse. The item? A high-end men's watch. I don't wear watches. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Seeing the proof in black and white, a physical receipt for a gift meant for my replacement, makes the heart go cold in a way words never can. The air in the alleyway smelled of damp brick and diesel exhaust. I stood there, tucked behind a rusted dumpster, feeling like a predator in a world where I was supposed to be the prey. Across the street, the Evergreen Fine Arts Gallery glowed with a warm, inviting amber light. At exactly 6 o'clock, the door swung open. Sarah stepped out, laughing with a man named Julian Vance. He was the rising star of the Portland art scene, a man whose charm was as manufactured as the prints he sold. As they walked toward the parking structure, Julian didn't just walk beside her, he claimed her space. He reached out and adjusted her coat, a gesture so intimate it felt like a slap to my face. They stood by her car, the SUV I paid the insurance on, and whispered. I realized then that I wasn't just losing a wife. I was being edited out of my own life story. If you were standing in that alley, watching your life's investment walk away with a stranger, would you have stepped into the light or stayed in the shadows? Share your thoughts in the comments. When I got home that evening, I made sure I was already in the kitchen. I was roasting a chicken with lemon and rosemary, the scent of a happy home filling the rooms. Sarah walked in, glowing from her time with Julian. "Smells amazing, Elle," she said, kissing my cheek. I felt a wave of revulsion so strong I had to grip the counter. We sat across from each other at the mahogany table I'd refinished by hand. She started talking about nursery colors and baby names. "Liam, if it's a boy, Maya, if it's a girl," she said, her eyes bright with a future that stole my breath away. I looked at her and realized that the woman I married died the moment she decided to bring another man's child into our bed. I didn't argue. I just smiled and said, "Whatever you think is best, Sarah." That was the moment Elias Thorne died. The man sitting across from her was just a shell, waiting for the timer to go off. One of the next 72 hours were a masterclass in digital ghosting. As a software architect, I understood that a person is just a collection of data points. To disappear, I had to poison the well. I spent my lunch breaks at public libraries using VPNs to access our accounts. I diverted automated investment contributions into a series of offshore crypto wallets I'd aged for months. I created a trail of search history on our home computer that suggested I was looking into a surprise baby moon in Sedona. I wanted her to think I was planning a future, not an escape. I packed a single duffel bag, no keepsakes, no photos. I left the wedding ring on the nightstand, right next to the lab report that started it all. The stage was set. I left at 3:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. The neighborhood was silent. You're not the only sound, the rhythmic ticking of the rain on the roof. I drove through the night, heading toward the rugged coast of Oregon. The rain turned into a torrential downpour, blurring the lines between the road and the cliffs. I stopped at a vista point overlooking the Haystack Rock. I took my phone, the one Sarah had the GPS tracking on, and placed it carefully on the floor mat of a parked tourist bus headed for Vancouver, BC. Let them look for me in Canada. I was headed south. I checked into a small, driftwood-colored motel under a fake name. As I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the Pacific Ocean roar, the weight of it finally hit me. I was 34 years old and I had nothing. If you were in Elias' shoes facing a betrayal that wiped out your entire identity, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. Detective Miller didn't look like a man who believed in miracles. He sat across from Sarah in our living room, the room where we'd picked out the crown molding together, and tapped a rhythmic beat on his notebook. I was watching through the hidden nanny cam I'd forgotten to deactivate, the feed running through a secure relay to my laptop in Coos Bay. "Mrs. Thorne," Miller began, his voice like gravel, "we've tracked your husband's phone to a bus headed for Vancouver. But here's the thing. The security footage from the bus station doesn't show Elias. It shows a man in a heavy poncho who never looks at the camera." Sarah leaned forward, her hand resting on her stomach. "I don't understand, Detective. Why would he leave like that? We were perfect." "Were you?" Miller asked, tilting his head. "Because we ran a check on your joint accounts. Someone moved $50,000 into a private holding 3 months ago. And your neighbor, Mr. Henderson, says he saw a silver sedan parked in your driveway while Elias was working late. A silver sedan registered to a Mr. Julian Vance." The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just went very, very still. It was the look of a woman who realized the ground she was standing on was actually a trapdoor. While the police were busy looking for a body, I was busy occupying Sarah's mind. I didn't just leave. I left a trail of digital breadcrumbs designed to keep her in a state of perpetual looking over her shoulder. Every night at 11:11 p.m., our wish time, I had a script set to trigger a smart home event in the Laurelhurst house. One night, the smart speakers would play the first 10 seconds of our wedding song at a whisper-thin volume. Another night, the smart thermostat would drop to exactly 62 degrees, my preferred sleeping temperature. I watched through the internal cameras as she wandered the halls with a flashlight, her face pale and drawn. She wasn't just losing her husband, she was losing her sanity. She started sleeping with all the lights on, the glow of the hallway spilling into our bedroom, illuminating the empty side of the bed that used to be mine. I watched her call Julian in the middle of the night, sobbing into the phone that the house was haunted. I saw him lose his patience, his voice sharp and annoyed. "It's just a glitch, Sarah. The guy is gone. Get over it." That was the first crack in their perfect romance. Without my presence to act as their common enemy, they started to eat each other alive. Detective Miller didn't just look at bank balances. He looked at the DNA of our spending. He brought a stack of ledgers to the house, spreading them across the kitchen island. I watched through the lens of the hidden camera as he pointed to a series of line items from the last 18 months. "Mrs. Thorne," Miller said, his voice flat, "I'm looking at a business expense for $5,000 listed as gallery lighting. But when we contacted the vendor, they said the invoice was for a custom-built mahogany drafting table delivered to a studio apartment in the Pearl District, an apartment leased to Julian Vance." The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was a systematic pillaging of our future. Every dollar I had saved for our child's college fund, and every bonus I'd earned for pulling all-nighters at the firm, had been converted into gifts for a man who didn't even have the courage to stand by her when the police knocked. I sat in my motel room, watching her face crumble as the financial walls closed in. She hadn't just cheated on me, she had treated me like an ATM for her new life. I eventually moved further south, into the Redwoods of Northern California. I became Caleb Vance, using the surname of the man who stole my wife as a final, ironic joke. I found work at a small tech startup that didn't mind paying under the table for consulting. Living as Caleb was quiet. The first winter in the Redwoods was a trial of fire and ice. The fog doesn't just sit in the trees, it invades your mind. I spent the month of December chopping wood until my hands were raw. The physical pain, a welcome distraction from the mental loops of Sarah's face. I sat by the wood stove, the orange light flickering, and I realized I didn't know who I was. I went to the small mirror and looked at the stranger staring back. The beard was thick and shot with gray. The eyes were harder. I realized that Elias had been a character I played to please a woman who never really existed. Caleb was the truth. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in Elias' story and share your thoughts in the comments. The suburban secrets leak didn't just stay on the internet. It bled into the streets of Portland. I watched through neighborhood forums as the people who had once brought Sarah casseroles became her harshest critics. Someone had spray painted the word liar across our old driveway in neon green. I remember watching a feed from a neighbor's camera. Sarah had attempted to host a small support gathering. She had spent all day setting up chairs on the porch. Not a single person walked up those steps. She sat on that porch alone, surrounded by empty chairs, staring at the street. The silence of the neighborhood was a physical weight. She was being erased from the city she loved, just as I had erased myself from her life. Tell me in the comments, is there anything more cold than a social death? How would you handle being completely ignored by everyone you knew? While I was living in the woods, Sarah was drowning in red tape. Because I had disappeared, she couldn't access my life insurance policy, a multi-million-dollar safety net. My forensic accountant saw the transfers she had made to Julian's private accounts. The day the paternity results were entered into the public court record was the day the last of the Thorne legacy was scrubbed clean. The legal transcript was cold. Genetic testing concludes a 0.0% probability of paternity for Elias Thorne. Secondary testing identifies Julian Vance as the biological father. The judge ruled that I had no financial obligation based on a biological lie. Julian Vance was nowhere to be found. He had fled to southern France, leaving Sarah alone with the evidence of her betrayal. In my cabin near Eureka, I began to find beauty in the things I used to find boring. I learned the names of the mosses that grew on the redwoods. I realized that my life in Portland had been a series of status updates masquerading as a personality. I spent one evening burning every physical document I had left from my old life. The deeds, the certificates, the photos. As the flames licked the edges of our wedding album, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound sense of lightness. I was no longer the architect Elias Thorne. I was a man who knew how to start a fire and how to sit in silence without needing a distraction. If you could erase your entire past and start over with a clean slate, would you do it? Or are your scars too important to lose? Share your thoughts in the comments below. 2 years passed before I felt the pull of the North again. I didn't go back for revenge. I'd already had that. I went back for closure. I drove past the old house in Laurelhurst at dusk. The vibrant blue trim was peeling, and the garden was choked with weeds. The porch swing, where we had sat and talked about our future, was broken. A for sale sign stood crookedly in the yard. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a carcass. I realized then that I didn't hate her anymore. I just felt nothing. The life I had mourned had been a house of cards that didn't need a villain to knock it down. It just needed the truth to stop holding it up. I drove away without looking back. I found her by accident at a grocery store in Lake Oswego. I was standing in the cereal aisle looking for something simple when I heard her voice. "No, Leo, put that back, honey." It was her. She looked thinner, exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. And there was the boy, Leo. He was a toddler with Julian's dark, curly hair. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. She froze, her hand gripping the handle of the cart until her knuckles turned white. I saw the recognition flare in her eyes, the way she looked at my silhouette. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked toward the exit, a phantom in a flannel shirt. What would you have done if you saw Sarah in that grocery store? Would you have confronted her or walked away like Elias? Let me know in the comments. That night, I sent one last email to her old address from a secured, untraceable server. I saw you today. I saw him. He looks just like the man you traded our life for. I spent a long time wondering if I should hate you, Sarah. But standing in that aisle, all I felt was pity. You're living in the truth now, and I can see how heavy it is. Elias Thorne is gone. Mother, don't look for him. I then initiated a self-destruct sequence on my private server, deleting every scrap of digital evidence of my existence. My life is quiet now, and that's exactly how I like it. The story of the man who disappeared isn't a tragedy. It's a story of a man who finally found himself by losing everything that wasn't real. Honesty, I've found, is much easier to sleep with than a beautiful lie. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into the archives of family secrets and revenge. This story is a reminder that the truth always finds a way to the surface. If this journey moved you, please give this video a like, leave a comment with your overall thoughts, and subscribe to my channel, Family Secrets and Revenge. Your engagement helps us bring these hidden stories to light. I'm David, and I'll be here for the next secret. Thanks for watching.